Hello everyone on the channel. My name is Ryan, and I've been working as a 911 operator for over 10 years. I've answered calls of all kinds: robberies, accidents, rescue requests, and even embarrassing mistakes. But the story I'm going to share today didn't exactly happen to me. It was shared by a former co-worker, an experienced guy who always kept calm in the worst situations. The problem is that after that call, he was never the same again. This happened during Hurricane Milton, a monstrous storm that devastated the East Coast. It was nighttime. The winds were howling like something alive, knocking down poles, ripping off roofs, throwing cars into the air like toys. The phone lines were congested with desperate calls, people trapped in their homes, unexpected flooding, fires caused by broken wires. Absolute chaos. My colleague Mark was already exhausted at that point. He said that the worst part wasn't the number of calls, but the feeling of helplessness. Often, all we could do was tell people to hang in there and wait. But then, around 2 in the morning, he received a different call. One that started like so many others, but gradually turned into a real nightmare. 911, what's your emergency? The voice on the other end was that of a child, a boy. He sounded scared, but his breathing was too calm for someone who should have been fleeing a disaster. There's someone in my house. Mark looked at the screen. The caller ID showed a home number from a coastal area that should have already been evacuated. His heart raced. Okay, kid, what's your name? Josh, the voice replied. I'm 8 years old. Josh, are you alone? The silence lasted a bit longer than it should have. Then he answered. My mom is here, but she's sleeping. Something about the way he said that bothered Mark. Can you wake her up, Josh? No. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. He looked around, trying to signal for a supervisor, but everyone was overwhelmed. He would have to handle this call alone. Okay, Josh, you said there's someone in your house. Can you see this person now? The answer came in a barely audible whisper. Yes. Mark squinted. The line was static, and the wind howled in the background. He turned up the volume on his headset. Where is this person, Josh? In my window. Mark looked at the clock. The hurricane was at its peak at that moment. Winds nearing 125 miles per hour, torrential rain, flooded streets. There was no way anyone could be outside of a window, not without being swept away by the wind. Josh, listen to me. Is this person inside or outside your house? They're outside, he answered hesitantly. But what? They're not moving. Mark felt his stomach churn. What do you mean, not moving? They're just standing still, looking at me. Mark's heart started pounding faster. He quickly typed to try to locate the caller's house. The storm was ravaging the city, but there might still be time to send a unit. Josh, what does this person look like? Can you describe them to me? The line went silent for a moment, only the sound of the storm. Then, the answer came in a thin voice. He looks like me. Mark froze. What do you mean, looks like you? Josh sniffled, as if holding back tears. He's wearing the same clothes I am, but the face... The connection started to fail. Josh's voice became distorted. Mark hit the computer screen, trying to restore the call's location. Josh, what's wrong with his face? The answer came slowly, as if the boy was too hesitant to speak. He doesn't have a mouth. Mark felt a cold shiver run through his body. Josh, get out of that room, now. But the call started to crackle. Voices whispered in the background, something Mark couldn't make out. He shouted into the phone. Josh, can you hear me? Then, for a brief moment, he heard a noise on the line. 3 slow knocks. On the window. And then, the sound of the phone dropping to the floor. The line went silent. Mark tried to call back. Nothing. The call's location disappeared. He dispatched a unit, but due to the hurricane, it would take time for anyone to get there. When they finally arrived, they found the house destroyed. The storm had taken almost everything, but among the wreckage, they found the cordless phone still connected. The last call made? To 911. But there was no sign of Josh, not of his mother, not of anyone who could have been there that night. The house was in ruins. The wind had torn down the walls, scattered debris throughout the entire neighborhood. The unit arrived too late. No sign of Josh. No sign of his mother. No bodies. No clues. Just a cordless phone still functioning with the last call logged to 911. Mark couldn't sleep that night. He kept replaying the conversation in his head, every detail, every pause, trying to find a logical explanation. But there was no logic in it. How could a child disappear without leaving a trace? Who or what was outside the window? The next morning, Mark went to the chief and asked to investigate the call's address. He knew it wasn't his job, but he couldn't let it go. He needed to know if that house really existed, if Josh really lived there. He needed something concrete to hold on to. The address led to a small coastal neighborhood, devastated by the hurricane. Houses destroyed, fallen poles, a strong smell of sea air and rotting wood in the air. Mark found what was left of the residence. The place seemed old, with exposed bricks and waterlogged remnants of furniture scattered across the floor. He approached, feeling his steps sink into the mud. That's when he saw it. On the only wall still standing, there were marks. Small marks made with a pencil, like the ones parents make to measure their children's height. And next to each mark, a name and a date. Josh, 2019. Josh, 2018. Josh, 2017. Josh, 2016. Mark furrowed his brow. Each mark showed the boy's growth year after year. He ran his fingers over the lines. They were real. But something was wrong. Just below the last mark there was another, almost erased by time, covered with dark moss. Mark knelt down and rubbed the dirt with his trembling hand until he could read what was written. Josh, 1994. He recoiled, his stomach turning. This didn't make sense. If the child was the same age in 2019, how could there be growth marks recorded in 1994? It was as if it was the same boy. The wind blew hard, whistling through the rubble. Mark felt a chill run up his spine. That's when he heard the noise. 3 slow knocks. He turned. The cordless phone was still there, lying in the debris. But now the screen was flashing. Incoming call. Mark swallowed hard and against all his instincts answered, 911, what's your emergency? For a moment there was only static. Then a soft whisper, almost like the sound of the wind. He's back. The call dropped. Mark dropped the phone and stepped back, feeling his chest tighten. This couldn't be real. But it was. He was holding the proof in his hands. That night he requested time off from work. He said he needed a break. He never answered a call again without feeling a chill down his spine. And whenever it rains heavily, he locks himself in his house, shuts the windows, and tries to ignore the sound of the storm. But sometimes he still hears the knocks, always 3 times, on the window. If I could go back in time, I would have left the city like everyone else. I would have packed my bags, shoved everything into the car, and driven as far away as possible from Hurricane Milton. But I stayed. I stayed because I thought I was smart, because I didn't want to spend money on a hotel, because the media always exaggerates. I thought it would just be another strong storm, and the next day I'd be drinking coffee on the porch, laughing at the chaos that never came. I was wrong. At first it was exactly how I predicted. The wind swayed the trees, the rain fell heavily on the roof, thunder rumbled in the distance. I grabbed a few beers, turned on a flashlight, and lay down on the couch, listening to the battery-powered radio. The evacuation warnings were still playing, but it no longer mattered. I was there, stuck until it all ended. No electricity, no neighbors, just me and the sound of the storm outside. That's when I heard the footsteps. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The wind made strange noises, whistling through the cracks, pushing branches against the walls. But the footsteps were there, slow, precise, crushing the wet earth outside my house. I got up and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back a little. The rain blurred everything, but that's when I saw it. A silhouette standing across the street, right in front of my house. He wasn't moving. I stood there for a moment, waiting for him to do something. Maybe a lost neighbor, A latecomer who stayed behind and was now looking for shelter? But he didn't seem to be looking for anything. He was just there, staring at me. I went back to the couch, trying to ignore it. Maybe it was just a trick of the fog, a misplaced streetlight, a weird reflection. I grabbed another beer, turned my radio back on, but the footsteps came back, now closer. My skin crawled. I walked slowly to the door and locked it, even though I knew no one in their right mind would be walking outside in that storm. I went back to the window. He was still there, but now much closer. My heart hammered in my chest. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it down the street. The light cut through the curtain of rain, and I finally got a good look at him. He was a tall man, wearing a suit. His hair was plastered to his forehead from the water. His face was too pale, eyes too dark. But something was wrong. The storm raged around him. The winds tore off signs, shattered windows, but he didn't move, not an inch. It was as if the storm didn't touch him. The flashlight flickered and went out. The battery died. I cursed under my breath and ran to grab another. When I returned to the window, he was no longer there. The rain continued to pour. The street was empty. I sighed, nervously laughing at myself. I was just paranoid. Isolation does that to you. I grabbed my backup flashlight and decided to go to sleep. Hours later, something woke me up. A repetitive sound, low, a soft but persistent tap. I sat up in bed, still groggy, trying to understand. That's when I realized. It was knocking. At my door. My lungs froze. I stayed completely still, listening. Tap, tap, tap. 3 soft knocks. Then silence. Then another 3. My mouth was dry. This didn't make sense. No one should be here. There was no one for miles. I grabbed my phone. No signal. The storm continued to batter the house. The wind howled through the cracks. But in the midst of that hell, someone, or something, was knocking on my door. I took a deep breath. Maybe it was a survivor. Someone who stayed behind like me. Maybe they were cold, scared. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I knew what I had seen earlier. I knew something was wrong. Still, my hand moved to the doorknob. I stood there, hesitating. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A child's voice, whispering from behind the door. "Why did you lock it?" The ground seemed to vanish beneath my feet. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the door. This wasn't possible. I lived alone. There were no children here. "Let me in." The voice was low, but it cut through the storm like a knife. It didn't sound like a request. It sounded like an order. My breathing became erratic. I needed to get out of there. I grabbed my backpack, threw a few things inside, and ran to the back of the house. But when I reached the back door, I froze. The doorknob turned. Someone was already trying to get in. I turned and ran to the bedroom. I locked the door, shoved the dresser against it. My chest was heaving uncontrollably. I tried to think. I tried to understand. Then I looked at the window, and there he was, the man in the rain, now in my backyard, his face pressed against the glass, smiling. I couldn't breathe. My body was frozen, my eyes fixed on that pale face on the other side of the glass. The man in the rain didn't blink, didn't seem to be breathing. His smile was distorted, too wide, his teeth slightly exposed, as if he were holding back a laugh. The storm raged around us, knocking down branches, but he remained there, motionless. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't obey. I could only stare at that smile that seemed to grow bigger by the second. Suddenly he raised a hand and knocked on the glass. Knock. 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 I jumped back, stifling a scream. He knocked again. Knock. 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 The sound, muffled by the wind, reverberated in my head. Each beat made my heart race. I closed my eyes, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. When I opened them, he was gone. Only my reflection, pale and frightened, remained in the window. I jumped in fright as the horrible thought crossed my mind. What if he was still there? What if he was inside the house right now? I searched the room, seeing the door still blocked by the dresser, but what about the rest of the house? Slowly, I opened the door a crack. The hallway was dark, the wind whistling through the holes in the walls. Something was wrong. The air was thick, as if I were no longer alone. That was when I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. Wet footsteps echoing across the hardwood floor. My throat went dry. They were coming from the living room. Slowly, one step at a time, as if someone were exploring the house. My brain screamed at me to stay where I was, but my body moved on its own. I needed to see. I needed to know. I dragged the dresser and opened the door slowly, tiptoeing, trying not to make a sound. The hallway led to the living room. Rain was pouring in through a broken window, pooling on the floor, but the house was empty. Or almost. Wet footprints led from the back door to the center of the room, but then stopped suddenly, as if the person had disappeared. I swallowed hard. I scanned every corner. Nothing. But something in the reflection of the switched-off TV made me freeze. Behind me. Someone was there. I spun around quickly, heart racing, but there was nothing. Just the empty house and the hurricane roaring outside. My legs shook. I had to get out of there. I grabbed my backpack, checked the still-locked front door, and ran to the back. If I could make it to my car, I could escape. Even with the storm, anything was better than staying here. When I opened the back door, I stopped dead in my tracks. The yard had been turned into a muddy swamp by the rain, but in the middle of it, standing as if waiting for me, was he. The man in the rain, his head tilted slightly to the side, his arms at his sides. His smile was there, but his eyes were now empty, like bottomless pits. He took a step forward. I took a step back, feeling my body shiver. Then, his mouth opened unnaturally, his jaw dislocating, opening wider than it should. No sound came out, only the muffled echo of the storm. I didn't wait for anything else. I turned on my heel and ran through the house, stumbling over furniture, fighting panic. He was behind me. I could feel it. I didn't need to look to know. His presence was a crushing weight, as if the air was being sucked out of me. I reached the garage, my heart pounding. The car keys were in my pocket, my hands shaking, but I managed to unlock the door. I got in the car and started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the driveway. He was there, inches from the windshield. The smile was gone. Now he was just watching me, as if he was waiting for something. I accelerated full throttle, throwing the car into the rain. I drove through the yard and skidded down the street, not looking back. The hurricane was trying to swallow me, but nothing else mattered. I just had to get out of there. I just had to get away. But even after the city was behind me, even after the hurricane had faded and the sun had come out again, I could still see him. In the reflection in my rearview mirror, in the window of a cafe across the street, in the crowd standing there watching me, always there, always smiling, always waiting. I shouldn't be alive. Hurricane Milton destroyed my entire city. Houses ripped from the ground, streets turned into rivers, poles fell like twigs. I saw the sky turn black in the middle of the afternoon. I saw trees flying as if they weighed nothing. The wind screamed, not like a natural phenomenon, but like something alive, something that wanted to rip everything away from us. I managed to escape at the last minute. I grabbed my backpack and ran without looking back. The rain was so heavy that I could barely see ahead. All I knew was that I needed to get to a shelter. Any shelter. That's how I found that place. It wasn't an official shelter. There were no signs, no name on the entrance. Just an old building at the end of town, a construction that seemed to have been forgotten by time. But the door was unlocked, and when I went in, I saw that other people were already there. There were about 15 people in total. Some huddled on old mattresses, others sitting on the floor, eyes wide, faces pale. The storm raged outside, rattling the windows, vibrating the walls. But inside, it was dry and safe. At least, that's what I thought. At first, no one said much. Everyone was too scared to talk. I sat next to a middle-aged woman and a boy who looked like her son. She held his hand tightly, as if she was afraid to let go. Time passed slowly. My clothes were soaked and a musty smell permeated the air. I tried not to think about what I had lost, what I had left behind. I just had to survive the night. Then someone disappeared. It happened quickly. An old man who had been lying in the corner was simply gone. At first I thought he had gone to the bathroom, but when I went to look, the hallway was empty. I told the others, but no one seemed willing to react. The woman next to me just shook her head, her eyes fixed on the floor. The boy tugged at her shirt and whispered something. She simply replied, "Stay quiet." Something was wrong in that shelter. I looked around. The building was large but old. The roof creaked under the weight of the rain. The light bulbs flickered from time to time, casting long shadows across the walls. Another scream. I turned around instantly, but all I saw was emptiness. Where a man had been sitting, now only clothes were thrown on the floor, still damp from the storm. People began to move. Some murmured among themselves. Others avoided looking at each other. Panic was growing in the air, but no one did anything. "Where is he?" I asked, my voice louder than necessary. "Has anyone seen him?" Silence. The woman next to me held her son in her arms and said, "That's how it goes." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "What do you mean by that?" She didn't answer. The storm outside got even worse. The wind slammed against the windows, making the glass shake. The entire building groaned under the force of the gale. And then, I heard it. A whisper, coming from the end of the hallway. It was low, almost imperceptible amidst the noise of the rain, but it was there. Indecipherable words, as if someone was whispering directly into my head. I stood up slowly. My instincts screamed at me not to go there, but something was pulling me forward. A step. Another. Someone grabbed my arm. The woman. Her eyes were wide. Her voice came out in a thread of desperation. "Don't go." I swallowed hard. "What's in there?" She shook her head. "Don't look." But it was too late. I had already looked. At the end of the hallway, where before there was nothing, there was now a half-open door, and behind it, only darkness, and a still silhouette, watching me. The silhouette didn't move. My heart was pounding in my chest. The storm was raging outside, shaking the walls, but here, in that dark hallway, everything seemed suffocatingly silent. The woman next to me held my arm tightly, her fingers digging into my skin. "Don't go," she repeated, her voice cracking. But I already knew there was no turning back. The open door at the end of the hallway seemed to be calling me. The silhouette remained standing there, motionless, as if waiting for something. The air around it felt wrong. The light flickered, and for an instant I caught a glimpse of a face, but it wasn't human. The woman next to me pulled her son closer. She was shaking. "This happens every time," she whispered. "Every time someone comes into that shelter." I swallowed hard. "Every time what?" She didn't answer. She just lowered her head and held the boy close to her chest. I looked around. The other people were also quiet, staring at the ground, as if ignoring it was the only way to escape. As if they already knew that if they looked for too long, if they recognized that presence, it would already be too late. But I had already looked. And now, it knew I was there. Suddenly, the lights flickered again and the silhouette disappeared. The air grew heavier. Moisture seemed to accumulate in my lungs. The hallway, previously empty, now seemed too narrow. The door at the end creaked, opening a little wider. Then came the sound, a shuffling of feet coming from within the darkness. Someone was leaving, or something. The woman tugged on my arm once more. "If you run now, you might have time." My throat was dry. Time for what? To get out. But deep down, I already knew there was no way out. My eyes fixed on the open door. The hallway seemed darker, deeper. With each flicker of the lights, darkness seemed to draw near. The sound of shuffling feet grew louder. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. The storm outside seemed to vanish. There was no more wind, no more thunder, no more rain. Just absolute suffocating silence, as if the world had ceased to exist, and a breath, right next to my ear. I froze. My eyes widened, but I couldn't move. The cold air brushed the back of my neck as if something was right behind me. I could feel its presence. I knew that if I turned my head, I would see it, but I didn't want to see it. A shiver ran down my spine, my muscles locked. I could hear the blood pounding in my temples. Then, something touched my shoulder. That was the moment I lost control. I screamed and threw myself forward, tripping over my own feet. The lights flickered violently. The people in the shelter began to scream. Something was moving down the hallway, too fast, too big. I ran. I ran without thinking, without looking back. I passed people, mattresses, windows fogged by the storm. I reached the front door. I grabbed the doorknob and tried to open it. It was locked. I knocked hard. My screams echoed through the shelter. "Open! For the love of God, open!" No one came. Behind me, footsteps, slow, precise. Something was approaching. My heart felt like it was about to explode. I knocked again, forced the doorknob, pushed the door with my shoulder. That was when I realized. The storm had stopped. The shelter was completely silent. My chest rose and fell uncontrollably. I turned my head slowly, and I saw. The people were no longer screaming. They were standing still, lined up in the middle of the room, all of them looking at me, all still, all smiling. I trembled from head to toe. "Why are you still trying to leave?" a voice asked. My mouth went dry. It was the boy, the woman's son. He took a step forward. His smile felt wrong, too far from his cheeks. "You're already here." The light flickered one last time, and everything went dark. By the time the storm hit, I had been hiding for hours. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I was on the run. I had made mistakes, bad choices, and now the police were after me. Milton was my last chance. While everyone else was fleeing the city because of the hurricane, I was going the other way. In the midst of the chaos, no one would pay attention to a guy covered in blood driving a stolen car. I followed the flooded road until I found an abandoned house on the edge of a field. It looked perfect. The peeling wood indicated that no one had lived there for a long time. I parked behind some bushes, broke down the back door, and ducked inside. The storm raged outside. The wind was so strong that it made the walls vibrate, as if the house were breathing. My wet shoes left footprints in the dust on the floor. Everything smelled of mold and rotting wood. I didn't care. I just needed a safe place to wait out the storm. The house had an old couch and a fireplace full of ashes. I searched the rooms. The upstairs had 2 bedrooms, one with a broken window, the other with a locked closet. The basement was too dark for me to risk going in. I closed all the doors and threw myself on the couch. The portable radio I'd stolen from a store still worked. I turned it on, turning the dials until I found a station. Just static. I leaned my head back, listening to the wind howling outside. The radio crackled, but beneath the noise, something made me open my eyes. A whisper. I turned the volume down. I sat up slowly. The house creaked as if it were moving in the wind. But that wasn't it. There was something else. A faint voice almost swallowed up by the sound of the storm. Someone was there. My body tensed. I grabbed the knife I had in my pocket and slowly stood up. I walked silently across the room, my footsteps sinking into the damp carpet. The house was large, full of shadows. "Is anyone there?" My voice sounded strange over the sound of the rain. No answer. I searched the kitchen, then the dining room. Nothing. Maybe it was the wind blowing through the cracks. Maybe it was paranoia. Or maybe not. I went back to the couch, but this time I sat up listening. The radio was still hissing. With each gust of wind, the house shook as if it were going to collapse. Then I heard it. 3 knocks. They came from upstairs. My hand tightened on the knife. I turned slowly, staring at the dark staircase that led to the bedrooms. My mind tried to find explanations. Wood creaking, some animal trapped in the ceiling. But deep down, I already knew. I wasn't alone. I climbed slowly, each step creaking under my feet. The hallway was narrow, the air heavier than before. I looked into the first bedroom, empty. The window rattled in the wind, scattering papers across the floor. I turned to the other room. The door was closed, and on the other side, something was scratching at the wood. My breathing became ragged. I gripped the knife tighter. I took a step forward, then another. My hand touched the cold doorknob. I could hear my own pulse. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was empty, except for the closet, the one that had been locked when I arrived. Now it was open. The wide open doors revealed only darkness inside. No clothes, no furniture. Just a black space, too deep to be a regular closet. The smell was strong. Damp, rotting wood. Something else. Something that made me cover my nose with my hand. Then I saw the marks on the floor. Footprints leading from the closet. Wet. Like someone had just walked out. I jumped away, my heart pounding. I spun on my heel, ready to run. But before I could take another step, I heard a noise behind me, the closet door creaking, slamming shut. I didn't wait to hear anything else. I ran down the hall, taking the stairs 2 at a time. The radio was still blaring as I passed the living room. I grabbed my backpack and ran to the front door, locked. I hadn't locked it. I turned to the back door, also locked. My breathing became uncontrollable. I ran to the window and tried to open it. Nothing. That's when I realized. The house wasn't shaking anymore. The wind was still roaring outside, but inside, absolute silence. And then, a new sound. Footsteps upstairs. Someone was walking down the hall, slowly, as if they knew I had nowhere to go. My body froze. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to run, but there was no way out. The footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs. The house was too dark for me to see, but I felt it. He was there, waiting. And then he began to descend, 1 step at a time. The first step creaked. My heart felt like it was going to come out of my mouth. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I could only listen. Another step. My breath became short. The house was dark, the air heavy with damp. The smell of rotting wood was stronger, as if something was deteriorating inside. 1 more step. I had to get out. Now I tried the door again. Nothing. I grabbed a chair and threw it against the window, but the glass didn't break. The sound echoed through the house, mixing with the noise of the storm. The footsteps stopped. My skin crawled all over. He knew I was trying to escape. The darkness on the stairs seemed deeper. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. The weight of his presence, the feeling of being watched. Then he moved. Fast. His steps, which had been slow, became a run. A chill ran down my spine, a primitive instinct that screamed at me to run. I ran into the kitchen, stumbling over furniture. Behind me, the footsteps were erratic, heavy, like something large was coming down the stairs anyway. The kitchen was dark, but I remembered what I had seen before. The back door was locked, but what about the basement? Bad idea, but it was the only one I had. I ran to the basement door and pulled it hard. It creaked open. The smell that rose from it was worse than anything. Mold, wet earth, something sweet and rotten. But I had no choice. I ran down the steps without thinking, my feet stomping against the old wood, bracing myself against the cold walls. The basement was a dark hole, colder than the rest of the house. I threw myself against the back wall and held my breath. Silence. I couldn't see a thing. The only light came from a crack in the basement door, a thin line illuminating the top of the stairs. Then a shadow covered the light. He was there. My stomach was in knots. My head was spinning. My chest was rising and falling uncontrollably. The silence lasted too long. Then something started coming down the stairs. But it wasn't like a man walking. It was an uneven sound. Scratching. Like nails dragging on wood. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding too hard. The shadow on the stairs moved erratically. He wasn't walking. He was crawling. My throat tightened. I wanted to close my eyes. I wanted to pretend he wasn't there. But then I heard the voice, low, ragged. "Why did you come into my house?" I froze. The voice was coming from all sides. It was like the words were being breathed straight into my head. Then another sound. Breathing. Very close. The darkness in front of me was absolute, but I knew he was there. I could feel it. The air grew colder. Then he whispered again, "Do you want to go out?" My blood ran cold. Yes. Yes, for God's sake, yes. But I couldn't answer. My legs were stuck in place. My body wouldn't respond. Silence swallowed everything once more. The storm seemed distant now. The house seemed gone. All I could feel was that thing in front of me, breathing slowly. Then something cold touched my wrist. I screamed and bolted up the stairs, taking them two at a time, not looking back. My body finally responded. I burst through the basement door, stumbled into the kitchen, and ran into the living room. The front door was open. Open. I wasted no time. I crossed the threshold and ran outside, my skin crawling, my mind screaming at me not to look back. The wind howled. The storm was still raging, but I didn't stop. I ran to the road, my chest burning. The rain was pounding my face. My stolen car was still there. I scrambled in, slammed the door, and tried to start the ignition with shaking hands. The engine sputtered. My heart stopped. Come on, come on, come on. The engine finally started. The car lurched forward, and then I looked in the rearview mirror. The house was there, lost in the storm. And on the porch, standing, looking at me, was he. Tall, thin. His face was too pale to be human. He didn't run. He didn't try to follow me. He just smiled. A smile that was too wide. And he waved, as if to say that this story wasn't over yet. I just wanted to get out of there. Hurricane Milton was destroying everything. The storm was advancing through Texas like a monster, swallowing entire cities, leaving a trail of chaos. The highways were clogged with cars trying to escape. People were desperate, horns honking non-stop, the radio telling them to get out as fast as possible. My wife was asleep in the passenger seat. My 5-year-old daughter, Emily, was in the car seat in the back, hugging her stuffed rabbit. The radio was only picking up static. My cell phone had no signal. All I had was the empty road in front of me and a warning in my mind, don't stop. But then, I saw it. In the middle of the field, among the crops that were swaying in the wind, there was someone, a child. I tensed up immediately. I looked in the rearview mirror, checking to see if my wife was still asleep. Emily, too. I was the only one seeing that. I took my foot off the accelerator. The child was standing there, alone, staring at the road. The headlights illuminated her frail body. She wore a white dress, her feet bare. Her black hair stuck to her face, wet from the rain. My chest tightened. The hurricane was coming. There was no way anyone could be there. My mind tried to find explanations. Had some family fleeing and left her behind? But who would leave a child alone in the middle of nowhere? I had to do something. I pulled the car over to the side of the road. I looked at my wife and Emily again. They were both still asleep, exhausted from the trip. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The wind almost knocked me over. The rain hit my skin like needles. I curled up and walked to the side of the road. "Hey, honey, are you okay?" The girl didn't answer. She didn't move. She just stared. My chest tightened. Something was wrong. "Where are your parents?" I yelled. No answer. The girl blinked slowly, and then she took a step forward. That's when I realized. Her feet wouldn't sink into the mud. My heart raced. A cold chill ran down my spine. Another step. My muscles locked. Instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. Another step. The rain pounded down, soaking her white dress. But something was wrong with the fabric. It wouldn't absorb the water. "Dad?" My breath stopped. The whisper came from the back seat. Emily was awake. I turned around. She was sitting in the car seat, eyes wide, staring at the girl in the field. "Dad," her voice shook. "She wants to come in." The air was knocked out of my lungs. I turned back to the road. The girl was closer. I could see her face now. My stomach turned. Her skin was too pale. Her eyes were too big. The mouth didn't move, but I heard her voice. "Let me in." I felt a chill in my chest. My instinct finally screamed, "Run." I took a step back, almost tripping. I turned on my heel and ran to the car. "Emily, close your eyes," I yelled, getting into the driver's seat and slamming the door. My fingers shook as I turned the key. The engine took a while to start. The girl was on the side of the road now. I stopped breathing. She didn't walk over. She just appeared. The engine started. I accelerated. The wheels skidded in the mud, but I managed to get back on the road. The car rocked in the wind. The storm raged around us, but I didn't look back. Emily was sobbing softly in the back seat. My wife woke up startled. "What happened?" My mouth was dry. Nothing. I didn't say anything. But in the rearview mirror, I saw something that took my breath away. The girl was still there, standing in the field, moving, looking, and smiling. The car skidded on the wet road. My fingers ached from gripping the steering wheel. My mind screamed at me not to look in the rearview mirror, but I looked and saw her standing there in the field, still motionless, still staring, the storm swirling around her without moving a hair. And then Emily spoke again, her voice shaky and low, saying she was coming, saying she wanted to come in. And I felt a chill run up my spine because I knew that no matter how hard I sped up, no matter how fast I ran away, she would always be too close. My wife woke up to the jolt of the car and asked what was wrong, but my mouth was dry and I couldn't answer. My eyes were glued to the mirror, waiting for the next flash of the storm. And when the lightning lit up the road again, she was no longer there in the field. She was closer, now on the shoulder, standing in the mud without sinking, her white dress without a single stain. And I wanted to believe it was a delusion, but Emily whispered, "A father." That made me. I realized that she saw it too, that she knew that it wasn't all in my head. And then came the knocking on the window. 3 dry, low knocks, as if someone wanted to come in without rushing, without urgency, just waiting for me to make the mistake of looking. And then came the voice, low, drawn out, impossible to be swallowed by the sound of the storm, impossible to ignore. "Let me in." My whole body shivered. My wife grabbed my arm, asking who was knocking on the window in the middle of a deserted road in the middle of a hurricane. But I knew I couldn't answer. I knew that if I said it out loud, it would become even more real. So I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and accelerated. I felt the car rock. I saw the streetlights flashing and going out as we passed them. And for a moment I thought we were escaping, that the thing was behind us, but that's when Emily whimpered and pointed to the back seat. My heart almost stopped. In the rearview mirror, I saw the silhouette of someone sitting next to her, still staring forward, eyes too black to be human, skin too white. And then that thing smiled, and before I could react, the car skidded, spun on the road, hit something I couldn't see, and everything became a blur of rain and darkness. I don't know how long I was out, but I woke up to the smell of wet earth and gasoline. My head was pounding. The car was on its side, the doors were open, the storm was raging around us, but there was no sound inside the vehicle, and when I looked at the passenger seat, my wife was gone. When I looked at the back seat, Emily was gone either, and then despair hit me full on. I stumbled out of the car, the mud swallowing my feet, my whole body shaking. I called out to them. I screamed until my throat hurt, but the only sound I heard was the wind, the rain, the empty echo of my own terror. And then, in the middle of the field, between the fog and the darkness, I saw a small silhouette holding a stuffed rabbit, standing still, motionless, looking at me. Emily. My legs moved before my mind could process it. I ran towards her, stumbling, slipping, feeling the cold of the storm soaking my body. But when I got close enough to see her face, something inside me broke. She smiled, a smile that was wrong, too wide, too dark. "Let me in." I stopped in my tracks, my breath caught in my chest. That thing was using my daughter's body, but it wasn't her. Her eyes were too deep, too empty, deep like black holes, as if everything I knew was being sucked into them. Then I felt something cold touch my arm. I froze to the bone. I turned my face slowly, breathless, voiceless, and saw my wife beside me, her hair drenched in water, her clothes soaked, her skin pale and dead, her eyes wide and soulless. And when her mouth opened, the sound that came out wasn't human. It was a slurred whisper, repeating the same words over and over again. New, let me in, let me in, let me in. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body didn't respond. My heart felt like it was going to explode. The storm was swirling around me. I could feel their presence getting closer, the smell of wet earth and rotten things getting stronger and stronger. And that's when I realized they were never trapped outside. I was the one trapped inside.